we're going to have a court update because yet again we've had another interesting week. So I'm going to hand over to Tim because he's the man in the know.
Are we on Right, I think we've had a record this week. Has anybody ever been in court and 3 different actions in 1 week? Owen's just set the bar very, very high there. I'll take questions as usual, but just to summarise what we've seen happen this week. Week last Monday, obviously, it's a great coverage in the press and on social media. The bailiffs went into BST and also to the stately home in Trafford Bowland. It would appear then that as a result of some form of paperwork error, that Owen was able to secure a temporary injunction to prevent the bailiffs continuing with the enforcement action. They did take quite a bit of stuff, it would appear, from the stately home, and this injunction sought to restrict their ability to actually then proceed to sell it, which would have been the next stage. So the technicality seems to be that on one piece of paperwork, the £10 million that had been paid hadn't been credited, which is a bit of an error. I don't think we ever actually found out whose error it was. I suspect it was at the bailiff's end, because when you get a judgment and you want the bailiffs involved, you send it to like this central unit that processes it and then sends it out to a local bailiff. So I think the error probably was made there, but we don't know. The return date of that in London was on Monday. And as we saw, the injunction was continued until final determination of the case. I didn't see actually a specific reference to it in yesterday's hearing, from what I could see. It's a technicality, and if it's fatally flawed, then the bailiffs just issue a new writ of control and do it again without the error. So I don't think it actually takes things much further. So that was Monday. Tuesday we had what was originally meant to be Tuesday and Wednesday. Was it Tuesday and Wednesday? Wednesday, Thursday, lose track. Wednesday, Thursday. We had the Court of Appeal, and that related to the Manchester decision. And there was it was listed for 2 days, it only lasted half a day. And that was because the appeal was on two very discrete points relating to the interpretation of the investment agreement for the South Stand. The Court of Appeal the judges there are very, very switched on, as you might imagine, and they just fire questions at the barristers until they've got their head around what the issue is. They dealt with that in half a day, and that then concluded. We don't know the decision yet. I think what we've got to bear in mind is with Manchester is it's not really important in the scheme of things. The total judgment, including costs, is probably about 1.5–2 million, which is a lot for all of us. But in the scheme of where this is at now, it's actually relatively insignificant, because Marcus Smith, if you remember, said that when I make this judgment in London for the 31.27 million, I don't want Valeriac claiming any more profits from the South Stand. So where effectively he gets what he gets in Manchester but doesn't have any future profit claims. So we don't know the outcome of that appeal, but I don't think it's going to be determinative to what happens at the football club one way or another. And then on Friday we have another application, and this was an application by Valeri's lawyers to effectively start enforcement action against the properties and the shares and the bank accounts that they are aware of. To put a bit of context to it, you might remember that when the judgment was given, that Owen, Carl and Suggester, as was, had to file affidavits of assets, and those were subject to an injunction. So effectively, Valeri and his legal team have a list of everything that's been disclosed, which I think, obviously, from the point of view of we didn't know what was on that list, but that makes it then relatively easy for them then to go ahead and start putting charges on things. So what we saw on Friday, the procedure for if the odd person might have come across it if you've ever been involved in a small claim or something like that. But when you apply for a charging order, you submit some paperwork to the court with details of the asset that's owned. You get an interim order, which is you can then charge against the property. And what we saw on Friday was what we call the return date, when the court just double checks it's all okay before they put the final order on. And that's why there wasn't it wasn't a particularly long hearing on Friday, and in the end, the only thing they were really arguing about was costs, because even the Oystons couldn't really argue with Valeri's entitlement to put charges on property. I think there was 24 properties that were charged. There was various bank accounts also effectively frozen, so that the proceeds come to Valeri. My understanding is one of them had a fairly significant amount of money in it. The figure of 900,000 had been mentioned. And there's also charges placed on various company shareholdings. The most important one from our perspective is that there's a charge now on what was Suggester, Owen shares in Suggester. And of course, Suggester, I always say Suggester so we can draw the distinction between the football club and Blackpool FC Properties Limited. The Suggester shares, of course, effectively they're the shares that control BFC. Because it's Owen's ownership of those shares, and Suggester in turn owes 77% of BFC. So for me that's quite an important move forward from the point of view of all those assets are now charged. The next stage, which I can go and explain in a bit more detail in questions, is that Valeri can now start applying to the court to sell those individual assets, properties, so as to start clawing money back. So that's what's happened this week. It's an eventful one, and I'm happy to take any questions from anybody who wants clarification on that, and perhaps also to tie into that where we think things are going to go from here.
What's happened to the woolly mammoth?
I mean, that front page of the Gazette goes down as one of the best front pages I can recall seeing. That was quality, that was. But ironically, we understand that woolly mammoth is actually worth quite a lot of money. So, but yeah, Owen wants to save his woolly mammoth for when he finally proves that Marcus Smith was wrong and that he did make the schoolboy errors that he speaks about. Where it is at the moment, who knows, but I'm sure it's been looked after. Anybody else? No questions at all? Nobody wants to know what's going to happen in the future? Right, listen, what will probably happen from here? Owen's got three options as I see it. One is he lets Valeri's legal team start cherry picking off the assets that are all now charged and selling them. So he can effectively do what he wants. The first thing that'll probably go is the money in the bank accounts, because that's the easy. They're effectively they're called third-party debt orders, and the bank effectively, because the bank owes Owen or Carl or Suggester the money. The bank is told you can't release that money to them, so that was frozen a couple of weeks back probably. The order's now been made final. Clifford Chance will just write to the banks and say send a credit balance from those accounts to our client account. That's the easy one. That will happen pretty quickly. So we know that there's at least one bank account with a significant sum of money. The only bank account that hasn't been charged, and there's a specific reason behind that, is the BFC one, because that would stop the ability for the football club to trade. So, and Owen Valeri said that he's not going to do anything that will put the football club at jeopardy. So we're talking here about non-football related bank accounts.
But is there anything in that? Is there anything in the club?
We don't 100% know that, but what we've been told anecdotally is that there's enough money in the football club account to see it through to the end of the season. And I think that came out in court during the course of one of the hearings. I think Scott's nodding his head there. So I think I've not been at all of them, but that was my understanding from reading Robbie's notes. So that's the thing that will probably happen the quickest. I understand one of the accounts is definitely Owen's personal account, and that there'll be the Travelodge money initially goes into, I'll keep referring to it as Suggester, goes into Suggester's account. So that's getting rents from the Travelodge at £500,000 a year. And whatever was in that account will probably be frozen as well. But we don't know the specifics. We only know the general what these accounts are and what these properties are. Somebody I think put a list up of these properties on ABFTT last night, so we've got a rough idea as to which ones they're talking about. With individual properties, just to finish that bit of the question, with individual properties, Valeri's got to make an individual application, or you could probably do them all at the same time, for what we call an order for sale. And that would be, he'll have each one valued, and then he'll go to the court and say, I want to appoint this estate agent to sell the property, and for me to have conduct of the sale. If Owen can sell it in the meantime, then he can potentially secure the release of that property from the charge. But what we've seen so far is a reluctance on his part to actually sell anything, to impose unrealistic values on these properties. Well, none of that will be happening, because he will not be controlling the sale, and that's the big distinction between what we saw before and what we'll see from Friday. So it is quite a, for me, quite a pivotal moment Friday, because the control of the sales are very, very rapidly moving away from the Oyston family. And of course, as we all know, when you're on a forced sale basis, these assets don't realise what you think they might necessarily be worth. So to realise 30 million, or effectively now probably 25 million pounds, the Oyston perception of the value of the assets to actually achieve that will probably double, I would think, because their valuations won't bear any resemblance to realisation values. So Owen has a choice of letting that happen. Now, for me, that would be madness, because you completely lose control of your own destiny. His second option is to take out the infamous loan, if it's still available. We've heard some suggestion that he's been able to negotiate another rate that's slightly lower, but it's still eye-watering rates of interest. And as we've spoken about at previous meetings, if you haven't got the income streams to actually service that loan, effectively you're going to have to keep selling assets to pay the interest payments, and the default rates would no doubt will apply if you don't. So the fact that he hasn't taken out that loan already, I think, is quite telling. Because I suspect he knows that only provides a short-term remedy. The third option, which is the one that we all hope actually happens, is that dialogue opens between Valeri and Owen, or their respective legal teams, with a view to hopefully engineering a situation where Valeri gets control of the club and gets control of the stadium, so that we can all go back to the football and do what we do best. I'd like to think that's the most sensible option. I'd like to think that finally Owen Oyston is beginning to realise that's the most sensible option. And most certainly, as we've seen this week in the press, Valeri's made it very clear that he envisages a future where he's involved in the football club, which sort of dispels the myth that he just wants to take his money. He would not be doing what he's doing with the EFL, the fit and proper test, if he just wanted to walk away. There's no point spending money doing it, and he is spending money doing it. It's not coming free. I think Clifford Chance sneezing it costs you a full-figure sum. So in reality, he's having to spend a serious amount of money to achieve that objective. And there's some hopefully, as a result of all us freezing ourselves in Preston, and as a result of what we'll be hearing about that we're going to be doing next week, we're, in our own little way, in our petition, are bringing pressure to bear on the EFL to sort of expedite that process, which they most certainly have the right to do under the rules. As somebody who spent last Sunday going through them with a fine-tooth comb, I know 100% that they've got the ability to lift the ban whilst they deal with the appeal. It's in the rules that they can do it. So there's no we'll be putting that to Sean Harvey and whoever else is there from the EFL. I won't go into that too much, because that's for other people to tell you about. But most certainly that issue will be dealt with next Tuesday, very, very forcefully from our perspective. So they're the three options. How quickly those options are going to come to, I think we're in a great place. There's a huge amount of money got to be paid. Everybody who thought after that hearing at the beginning of February that Valeri was doing nothing, we now know he wasn't doing nothing. He was getting all these charges in place. He was getting all these bank accounts subject to effectively an injunction, and we saw the benefit of that on Friday. That will have all happened 5 or 6 weeks ago. It didn't happen last week. It's not the way it works. as I know myself how long the return dates are normally about 4 to 6 weeks after the interim orders go on. So that was all happening without us knowing about it, and without Owen knowing about it. He didn't know about it. The whole point of this is to catch them by surprise and present them with a fait accompli. So I'm feeling very, very positive on that front, that option 3 will be the route that ultimately even the one remaining member of the Oyston family who doesn't yet see the light will that he'll ultimately realise that is his only practical option.
On those charge orders, the only thing I've not been able to see, unless I missed something, is Windike Farms and all the farm stuff on Balham Road and the land there. What have I missed it? It's reported that it's under 40 million asset. But those charge orders don't add up to under 40 million.
Yeah, that will depend. We've got to bear in mind that the judgment is only against Owen as an individual, Carl as an individual, and Suggester as was. So and I don't know the answer to this, if the Windike land is actually owned through another company other than in individual names or Suggester's name, then they can't be charged. Now there's still other ways that they can get at Owen if there's a shortfall on the app. What I've been hearing is that they're satisfied. There's more than enough assets in Owen's, Carl's, and Blackpool Properties names to cover this judgment in full.
Within that 27.
Within what they've got. Windike is probably outside for the reason I've just said, I would think. So if somebody does a check on Monday against the land in Windike, the answer will probably be there. But we might find it's owned in some form of joint venture with somebody then having shares, or another Oyston company having shares. So effectively, it'll be held through a third-party company as a joint venture, I suspect, because there's various people got interest in Windike, not just the Oyston family.
How would the shares be dealt with?
That's an interesting one. The shares have been charged. The shares can be sold, just like land can be sold. Normally, shares in a private limited company have a limited value but it is a majority shareholding, particularly the shares that Owen shares in Suggester are 97% shareholding, so that is a saleable asset. And in reality, what would happen is I would expect that you would get the order for sale of the shares, you would then have to auction them, and you would hope that Valeri would be the one who would offer the best price, because it would only be somebody who was interested in owning the football club. Well, the Suggester assets, of course, are wider than the football club, because it owns the Travel Lodge, it owns the wedding venue in the Trough of Bowland, it owns Squires Gate, as well as the shares in Blackpool. So there is a bit of a property portfolio built into it, and of course the stadium as well. The land that the football club sits on is all owned by Suggester. So, but yeah, we would be hoping that Valeri would be able to, because he can effectively do a credit, a contra against what he's owed, could outbid anybody if he chose to do so.
How does it come at the value of the football club? Who's going to arrive at the value? And are all these costs, including Clifford Chance's costs, the charges that are on, would that cover?
You would at the moment the charges will cover the £31.27 million less the 10 million judgment, and any interim order for costs made, because you have to have your costs assessed by the court. Don't know whether Jez is here, but Jez will tell you all about that and what a process it can become in itself. But in order to get a specific sum of money for what you're owed, when you're told you have to pay the other side's costs, you have to go through an assessment process, and that might not have been done yet. But at every hearing, you'll have seen that Clifford Chance have asked for an interim payment and got an interim payment against the cost orders. So my recollection was it was about 2 million in London, and it was 450,000 in Manchester, and all those specific sums will most certainly be added to the charge debt, with the balance to follow. Roughly speaking, the totality is about 35 million, of which 10 million has been paid.
Similar question. You said previously that Owen wouldn't be responsible for selling. So who is going to be responsible for actually selling?
Well, I would expect that Clifford Chance would ask that Valeri be given conduct of any sale, what conduct of sale means is that you get the right to appoint the estate agent. You can produce the contract documentation for sale, and if Owen won't sign it, I'm saying Owen, let's assume it's Owen's asset, particular asset. If Owen won't sign it, you go to the court and the judge signs it to complete the sale. So yeah, so effectively it's going to be very, very much in Valeri's hands.
Just one quick question for the board. There's a rumour going around on Facebook and Twitter and also other places in Blackpool that there's American owners what's looking to come in and tenancy the club, but Owen still owns the club. That's not going to be accepted by the Blackpool fans. Is that correct, what you know of?
I haven't heard other than, and I think it was Matt still here, Matt's mentioned American. From Owen's mouth, I've heard Chinese. But the problem is, you would think that any of those owners, or those prospective owners I should say, will do the due diligence and realise that as a football club it's not going to be viable if the Oystons remain. I'll be honest, it did cross my mind that the reason, and it's not quite come to fruition yet, it did cross my mind that we had the Justice for Fans meetings, that the reason Owen was concluding all the litigation and concluding it quickly was because he wanted to effectively try and demonstrate that he could bring fans back through the doors. You know, the fact that he thinks he can do that and the reality of the situation are two different things. But I would personally be surprised if anybody would commit to a deal that involved, particularly on a footballing basis, that would commit to a deal that involved them taking over the club and renting the stadium from Owen, or entering into any joint venture with Owen, knowing what the background of the current situation is, because they're not going to be able to bring people through the doors.
And the interested parties contacted BST. We've told them exactly that's the case, so they're fully aware of it.
Did we hear that we have, and there has been. Steve was just saying that there's various people who have contacted BST, and BST have spoken to various prospective purchasers who've been seeking to establish what would happen if they took over, and the Oystons weren't completely out of the building, and they've been told very clearly and unequivocally that the boycott would continue, and that would hopefully, and you'd like to think that anybody who was interested would make that type of inquiries, whether in that way or by some other means.
What's the truth behind the rumour of Owen's ill health?
Sooner the better. Sooner the better.